know you got hail to bale, hay to bale, hail to bale. It's been a long day. I apologize to everyone who has to listen to my word salad come out. But thank you for those that are able to join us, and thank you to those who will watch this in the future and get valuable knowledge out of it. Since we do have a small group today, we are in peak harvest season, so I understand people's attention is limited. Figure we can just open up the floor for discussion. If Kristen or Kyle, you have questions for our farm talker, Rob, who's been so gracious with his time and wisdom to share with all of us. And if not, I have lots of questions I'm already getting ready planning for next year because I didn't do everything right and I want to do better. But if Kristen or Kyle, you have specific questions.
So I'm in southern Nevada, and we're just now starting for our winter crops, which is, spring and fall crops probably for you, Rob. Like we're planting right now some pumpkins, our lettuces, our kales, our broccoli, onions, garlic, all that stuff. Well, garlic won't go in until October, but is there anything else that you guys grow that grows really well in your spring and fall seasons that I should be looking at besides traditional veg?
I think down in your climate, I lived down there years ago, but and it's probably a little hotter than it was when I was there. But the winters are wonderful. They're seldom ultra cold, so I would think any of the cold crops or crucifers, brassicas that you're interested in growing would all do well. Spinach would be another one. Chard, I think, would do well for you as also.
We grow our chard as a biannual, so it's alive for 2 years before it goes to seed.
Right. Peas, you could grow one of the spring and fall crops here are peas and radishes. You could probably grow carrots well, getting them up and harvesting them over the winter into the spring. Radishes, turnips, any of your root crops, I think would be a good choice too. You actually have a lot of options because barring an exceedingly cold winter, most of those plants can go through at or just below freezing and do fine with just a little row covers. So anything like that, I think, would do very well for you.
And then for cover crops, are we looking at just like winter rye, stuff like that, or?
Winter rye, winter wheat, because it doesn't get well below freezing, sometimes your rye seed, to get a good crop on the rye, it has to vernalize and freeze. Garlic will be the same way. You'll get a better bulb of garlic if it freezes in the soil after it's planted and it vernalizes. I'm not sure what the root of that is, but vernalization is important with some of your grain crops. They'll still grow, but they won't produce the nice tall top with the nice seed head. So oats, spring oats would be something that you could look at planting. Wheat, rye, vetch. Vetch can be a challenge if it gets away, but it is an annual. So if you don't let the seed accumulate, you really won't have a prolonged challenge getting rid of it. But vetch is a good cover crop also. Winter peas.
Awesome.
When you are planting oats or winter peas, are you doing that only for kind of soil amendment properties, or do you actually also harvest that? Because that's a more intensive process to get crop out of, correct?
It is, and generally, no, we don't harvest it. One of the things I've really liked about winter rye is that it has an allelopathic action on other seeds. It's very competitive. It doesn't allow a lot of competing seeds to germinate, and I don't know that they necessarily doesn't kill them. So if you don't put rye in, they will germinate, but it does keep other weeds down, and then you can actually go through with a mower, with a hedge trimmer, um, and do what's referred to as strip cropping, where you can leave several feet of rye stubble in between your rows, work the rye into your soil where you're going to plant, and then in a windy, harsh climate like we have anywhere in the state, really, and I know you get a lot of wind in southern Nevada also, the the strips of rice stubble will protect the seedlings and the young plants from the elements during hot, windy, dry periods. And then as they get more mature, then you can go in and either plant something where the stubble was or just incorporate it into the soil. So that strip cropping works well, but in a vegetable specialty crop setting, generally the grains are grown for a cover crop and they're incorporated back into the soil.
Kristen, did you have a question?
Yeah, so we're wanting to plant garlic this fall, but wanting to get a quick cover crop in first to kind of mulch that in, and we were wondering if you think it might be too late to plant buckwheat.
I was just going to say, if it warms up, buckwheat likes the heat. One of the things about buckwheat is it's a nutrient miner. It has a pretty vigorous root system, and it will pull nutrients from deeper in the ground up into the plant itself, and then those nutrients are incorporated in a zone that's more readily usable by traditional vegetables. Garlic is very deep rooted, however, so it may or may not help with the garlic. Um, but no, I don't think so. I know next week buckwheat grows really fast. Bees absolutely love it. Next week we're supposed to be in the mid 90s again, which is more normal. This September weather is really odd and poses some challenges. But if it gets warm again, the soil's already warm. I think you could get buckwheat to germinate and do well through September and early October, and then you could incorporate it into the soil. If you're going to incorporate it into the soil with a garlic crop, I would be careful not to let it go too much to seed, because you don't want it coming up and having to weed it out of your garlic next spring. But I think you could get buckwheat started next week when it warms up again.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from our farmers?
I'll jump on the buckwheat question. We've tried buckwheat a couple times at our farm, and we're planting it, I don't know, half inch deep along the drip lines, but we're getting very little to grow because we're just doing it in our rows. We don't have a big field. Should we cover it with like burlap and soak it? Do you think it's a water issue or a seed issue?
It's probably a water issue. It's a fairly durable seed. It's odd looking, actually. But once things start to germinate, if the seed dries out, is it a germination issue or is it a growth issue?
Sorry, germination issue.
Germination, I think it might be a water issue. It's just getting dry in there at some point. Once that germination process starts within the seed, it has to maintain a certain amount of moisture until it's germinated, and that root can go down and access moisture, and the leaves can start to photosynthesize. And then it's kind of self-contained and requires less water. But almost every time we've had a germination issue, it's been, even now there's one bed of lettuce, I've seeded it 4 times, and then I'll let it dry out, and it's not going to germinate. And so almost every time, if you're having a germination issue, it's usually a water irregularity in there somewhere. And it only takes once or twice to cause the whole thing to go down. That germination period, keeping things uniformly moist, is very important.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And you could do a germination test. You could take like in elementary school, we did it with beans, and but I've done it with alfalfa. I've done it with other seeds, and take some paper towels and lay the seed out on some paper towels and keep them moist, and see. I've done it with brassica seeds, arugula seeds, bean seeds, and keep them moist and see if they'll germinate. And you can kind of, if you do that and you get good germination, then you can rule out a seed issue. Sometimes it is a seed issue. A few years ago, we went through a whole bag of lettuce seed before I decided to quit trying to plant it, because when I did a germination test, it didn't germinate. It was just bad seed. And so, but you could do that too. You could do a germination test and figure it out. And then, but you keep things uniformly. And an inch might be too deep. Half an inch, I think. It depends on what like your seed supplier would say. But I think it's a fairly small seed. A bean seed usually gets planted about an inch deep, inch and a half is where we do it. I get better germination than an inch and a half to 2, but that's a big seed. It's got a lot of energy to punch those leaves up through the dirt. Buckwheat's kind of a medium-sized seed, so an inch might be too deep. Half inch might be a better depth. And then your tiny seeds are just barely covered with any dirt, 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. And sometimes with 1/4 of an inch with arugula or lettuce, that 1/4 of an inch is even too much. So I usually, on my planting depth, go on the lower side of the range that the seed supplier recommends.
Bill, did you have a question? I think we lost you. Or Matt, I see Matt was able to join on, since you're not out at Holly Farms as one of our apprentices. Maybe he's got a question. We're just doing sort of taking questions from the field.
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone, by the way. My biggest question so far, I guess, is I'm having spider mite issues on my melons, and I think over on my eggplants. I'm wondering, you guys have any suggestions to try and control that issue?
We're having issues with mites also. Russet mites, they're not spider mites, they're a little different, but they're treated similarly. They're actually a little easier. The spider mites have all those webs, and those webs they'll block the pathway, because if you use an if you use an insecticide, an organic insecticide, most of them operate by contact. So you have to hit the insect with the pesticide. And those webs getting the webs and the really bad tissue off is a really big help. And a lot of times those leaves aren't producing a lot of nutrients through photosynthesis for the plant. So getting the plants good and clean. Then when you apply something, you're applying it to your pests and the host plant portion that are going to recover and be healthy. We've used neem oil. Neem oil, I think, is the active ingredient in Azagard that Rodney mentioned a couple weeks ago. But a neem oil product is, it actually smells good. I don't mind using it. It doesn't affect the produce quality at all. So that's a good product. And then also we've used Mycotrol like you guys have used when you have the aphid problems there at BFI. Mycotrol works fair. It's because the webby, cruddy environment that the mites create, it's really hard to get good contact with them. But Mycotrol is also something, but a neem oil with mites, we've had very good luck with. It's been years since we've done that, and I can't remember the product, but Azagard or any neem oil product, I think should work well. And then just, it takes time, but cleaning up all the litter and the dead litter, the crusty, ugly, mighty, webby leaves, getting all that stuff squared away and out of the growing area will reduce it quite a bit. And sometimes too, and I don't know, Matt, you could tell me if it's the case. A lot of times mites, well, it's been an exceedingly hot summer, and a lot of times plants that get mites are next to a dry, dusty, unirrigated area. Is that the case where you have them?
The melons side of the house, opened up to netting. So I have heard that before, that they like hot and dry, which is kind of tough here in Nevada, obviously. So I've been kind of spraying them down just to get them moist, to make a less habitable environment for them. And it's actually seemed to work a little bit, but it's pretty lush in the middle part where the eggplants are, and I'm assuming it's mites. I've knocked a couple off, and I've seen some guys crawling around, so I'm pretty sure it's what's on the melons, and that's right in the middle of the house, of the hoop house, which is pretty lush relatively.
Okay. Yeah, that's where I was going with the question. A sprinkler or wetting the area down helps a lot. A lot of times you'll see mites in row crop fields along the roadways and on the edges, or in the plant row along pathways, or closest to the ends where those pests can enter. But you pretty much water, moisture, cleaning all the litter and debris and the webbing off, and then a neem oil product like Azagard is a good product for mites.
Okay, cool. And is that need to make direct contact also?
Yes, it does need to make direct contact. You can use a backpack sprayer that you pump up, but if you're doing that on 1,000 feet of tomatoes, for instance, that's just a lot of left arm pumping. And so a rechargeable battery, a rechargeable backpack sprayer is a good way to go, and just a real fine mist, and then just being real systematic. It's actually soothing. It's like grid work. It's just that systematic, every inch. You spray the top, you spray the bottom, you move down, you spray the top, you spray the bottom. And now that it's cool, the evenings are a great time to do it. When it's really hot, I was going out earlier in the year with a headlamp to do any foliar applications, either fertilizer or BT for the cabbage loopers. But now you don't have to do that. It's pretty nice. Just go in when the wind dies down right before dark, and a backpack sprayer works great.
Okay, gotcha. All right, I'm hoping with the slightly cooler temperatures that might they might abate a little bit. So we'll see how it goes. But cool, thanks, Rob. Appreciate it.
I maybe just a comment on that. We used to have a lot of mites and russet mite, particularly in the greenhouse, and spider mite. I don't know if it would work in a hoop house, but I don't see why it wouldn't. We would plug in like a burner overnight and do like a sulfur burner overnight, and then you don't have to spray it. Kind of it reaches every part of the plant. It's not organic. I don't know if you're organic, but it is not organic.
Okay, yeah, we are organic. But that is interesting to know. Yeah, I've never had to deal with mites before growing at home anyways. So I'm kind of at a loss. Yeah, I'll try a couple other things here.
And just sort of a follow up on that, you talk about removing the damaged parts of the plant to make it easier to get access to that. Do you have any best practice in how to make sure that you're only taking out the damaged parts and you're not taking too much, you're not doing too much damage?
A good rule of thumb, whether you're with any plant, if you're pruning, is not to remove more than a third of the green tissue, the photosynthetic tissue. And that's, if you're doing arboriculture and you're pruning trees, that's a rule there. It's a pretty good rules relative, but that's a good guideline there. And it's the same if you're harvesting kale, is not to remove a third of the leaves, no matter how big they are and how tempting it is, to leave 2/3 of the foliage, because that is photosynthesizing, storing energy in the root system. It's allowing the plant to go through the reverse process that they do at night. Respiration at night, that increased plant material allows that gas exchange to occur. So it's important not to remove more than 2/3. But sometimes you can tell when you're looking at it if it's burnt, if it's yellow, if it's dry and covered with spider mite webs, or if it, like my kale a couple weeks ago and the grasshoppers, oh, it was wild. They ravaged our outside kale. And you've just got this central vein. The rest of the leaf is gone. A nice, pretty Tuscan kale leaf, it just has that vein. So if you have stuff that's clearly not functional anymore, just take it off. I carry, I really like my Leatherman tool, and it's got a pair of scissors. So if something doesn't break off cleanly, a good idea is to have some scissors and snip it off nice and neat. Just like pruning a tree at the branch bark ridge, it's not a lot unlike what you want to do with plant material. You don't want to leave a big stem hanging there to dry and start to rot. You just want a nice clean cut. And sometimes if you pull it, you'll peel that strip of plant material off the stem, and then it dries and it lets disease in and the plant dries out. So if it needs to come off clearly, then take it off. But otherwise, it's good practice not to take off more than a third of the photosynthetic tissue.
Other questions from those in production, or I can start asking about my problem with earwigs, which actually haven't been a problem lately. So I think they're all finally gave in to the beer traps.
I'm missing you. You gave in to the beer traps?
Oh, they succumbed to all of the beer traps that I put out.
Good.
Kept them low. And now, will they devastate my seedlings again next year? Probably. Just have to
Well, at
see.
least then you know what works and you can be out ahead of them.
Since we are getting sort of the into harvest peak season, maybe chance you could talk about your planning for next year, your strategies for maximizing yield at the end of the year, end of harvest. Just your approaches as we're winding down into harvest to get the most out of the year.
One of the things we do, my wife, my oldest son Daniel, and I, we talk about this all the time, is just paying attention. Like when it was super hot, it's not often days above 109, 110, but there were whole varieties of peppers that didn't set any fruit during that really hot portion of July and like the first week of August is when they started. Other than when there were some lulls where we had 4 or 5 days in the 90s, that's pretty normal for here to have 95 to 105. Then we had a lot of fruit set, but we had other varieties of peppers that did really well even when it was hot. So when you're harvesting, it's really important to notice if you have a lot of different varieties, which ones are producing in the conditions that we have. Because I know we've had them growing before, they produce in normal conditions, but they don't produce when it's abnormally hot. And so something like that, we're not going to incorporate into our planning. And one of the things that we're dealing with, it's always really hard to get rid of a row of tomatoes to plant lettuce when the tomatoes are still producing. It just seems wrong. It just feels wrong. But those are some things to think about because those beds where you're going to be putting greens, you're going to be using higher nitrogen fertilizers probably than you would use on tomato plants. And then those are good places to start with your early summer crops the following year. So just getting a handle on your space and what grows well. We've had this year are they love the heat, the pepper plants, but and the hot peppers have produced tremendously. The bell peppers, we have 4 or 5 foot tall pepper plants, and then when they get peppers on them, and they've got a stem that's like smaller than your pinky, then they start like doing this domino thing, and so if if they're going to continue to do well in the environment we've created, we want to plant them in places where it's easy to support them somehow. So part of planning for next year is not only based on your market and what the products that people want, but successes and problems that you identify in the current year so that you can avoid them or repeat them if necessary in the upcoming year. So there's a lot of discussion. One of the things I use a lot, I take pictures with my cell phone because I see the tag and I can't ever remember the variety when you have 12 varieties of bell peppers. And so I'll take a picture of the tag and make a little note so that I know whether or not we want to plant that again or why. Jalapenos that are hot, some are not. And so I've been monitoring that. Eating, and most of us do. Most of us eat what we produce, but that really is a part of it too. And I had a discussion with a fellow at the market 2 weeks ago about jalapenos and how I'm glad he was wrong.
They're not hot anymore.
And that's what he was saying. These big green jalapenos are just grown for bulk. They're not hot. And I thought, well, I'm not gonna eat one here at the market because I need to be able to properly respond to customers, and I want my eyes watering. So this last Friday when I was picking, we have 3 varieties, and I'm glad that he was wrong. Um, Actually, one of them I could only eat the tip because it lit me up. But field testing your products is part of planning also. Some varieties don't taste good or they don't have the flavor. They might be pretty, but they don't have the flavor. Other varieties might not be as pretty, but people want good quality produce when they buy it directly from the farmer. They're expecting it to be pretty, but they're expecting it really to go well on their table and to provide them with optimal flavor and nutrition and cooking and eating experience. So that's part of planning also is knowing what's good and what's not, asking your customers what they like about something or what they don't like about something, and then being early so that if you want a certain type of seed, you can order it when they have it. And sometimes you can't get something and you have to try a substitute. Sometimes that plays out well. Other times it doesn't. In a lot of cases, we're growing the same varieties of things that we've been growing for 15 years because they do well in our environment. Our customers like them and we like them.
For those that you are growing year after year, are you always getting fresh seed from a supplier, or is there a crop that works to be able to save the seed and start that way?
Seed saving it's really impacted by scale.
Sure.
And of course, like if you were going to save chard or lettuce or any of your crucifers or brassicas, you have to let them bolt, go to seed, produce seed, and then other than producing seed that you'll use subsequently, that bed's not producing. Most of our seed we buy from either Peaceful Valley or High Mowing Seeds. There's a few outliers there that we get from other sources. We save our garlic seed. We save 40 or 50 pounds every year. And, we sell the table garlic and the cooking garlic till it's gone. It doesn't last us quite through the market season, but that's how we approach the garlic. And we do save our seed there because garlic, like rye, we talked about cover crops earlier. Rye and oats, there's certain varieties that grow well in certain environments. And so it's important looking at garlic also that comes from a seed source that's at least similar as far as latitude is concerned. And chilies, it's the same way with chilies. Most of our seed we source outward, and then we produce our own seedlings.
Sorry,
No worries.
we were just talking garlic seed. So that stuff you got for us, very pretty.
From Mr. Mewalt.
Yeah. Yes.
It's beautiful. We got our seed from him as well, and now we keep our own, and every year it gets bigger. I think as far as garlic too, most important part, we've planted garlic in mid-December, early January during a little brief thaw, and it stinks, when the ground's cold, your fingers are numb. It does a lot better if you plant it in late October or early November. Water it in well and let it get rooted before it gets cold. It makes a huge difference in the quality of your garlic.
Hoping this year I'll actually get it in October. It's been late November, early December.
Right.
Do you have any tips on how to, like, how do you process the garlic for seed, or how do you know what garlic is going to be good for seed?
Pretty much in the marketplace, you want to sell, and ours are getting smaller as the summer goes along. We've got one more week of normal size table garlic that's probably like 2.5 inches across, and it gets smaller and our price goes down. But generally, what you want when you harvest your garlic is for it to be very uniform and for all of those garlic heads to be big. And then you can get a premium price for your whole crop. And what we do, and it's pretty much universal, I think, things I've read, talking with people who are well known for their garlic prowess, Mr. Mewalt, Marcia Litzinger. There was another name I just thought of here a second ago. Um, um, Erston Witten is a tremendous garlic grower, but you keep the biggest heads with the biggest cloves for your seed garlic. One of the things that big clove does is it provides the energy for that piece of root cap to grow roots and to establish and to put up the shoot, the stem up the top. So that's what we do is we keep the big pretty heads with the idea, and it seems to be working out, is that over time the oh the other one was a neighbor, Grace Ritchie, um, Dayton's the last agrarian, is what I used to call her. She's passed now, but she grew garlic that she was locally famous for, and she kept the biggest heads every year for seed, and and her and her garlic was just absolutely amazing. So that's how we select the seed.
That in mind.
Hey Rob, I've got a question for you regarding garlic. Is there any benefit to getting your seed in a little earlier, like beginning of October, as opposed to the end of October, or is it really not make much of a difference, you think?
What you're really trying to do is get as much root on your garlic as you can before winter to hold that clove in the ground. So when the ground freezes, it'll just pop it right up. It's called frost heaving. And you'll see it with rocks and rocky soil in the spring. All the rocks are on the top, or some of them, or they move towards. So you're trying to get a good root on that garlic so that it doesn't frost heave. And at the same time, you don't want to plant it early enough that it actually sprouts. And then when it gets cold in December or January, those tops freeze off. Ideally, you want to see your garlic shoots in late February or early March with a well-established root system to feed them so that they grow rapidly the following spring. I've never had garlic freeze. Marcia Litzinger and Bill Mewalt have both told me that it can freeze once and it'll come back okay. It'll come back if it freezes twice, but not as well. And that if it freezes 3 times, it just doesn't have enough energy left in that bulb to resprout a third time. So I think that would be a caution in planting too early. You'd get good root development. But if we had a warm period from mid to late October, early November, it might sprout. And unless they were mulched, probably would have those garlic shoots freeze at some point during the winter and set it back a little bit.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Matt.
Hey.
I was thinking also about the question that you had last week about wood pellets. And there were some that were approved as a mulch and an amendment, but not as a growing medium.
Right.
But I got to thinking about that. That is probably because no one has requested that they be evaluated for organic use as a growing medium. Because if there was any element in there, any prohibited substance or something that would, pellets, they would not be allowable for use as a mulch or a soil amendment. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
absolutely. So, yeah, but if it doesn't say explicitly as a growing medium, then you can't use it until further notice, I guess. Would that be right?
correct. You
Yeah.
could submit it or ask the manufacturer to submit it. They might, but
Okay.
a good way to do that once you're certified is to talk to CCOF and to your organic certification specialist and say, what would you recommend I do? But I don't think because it's approved for use in the soil for other purposes that there would be any reason why it would be too complicated to get it approved as a growing medium.
Okay, gotcha. And so that is something that like a third party like I could request them to do. It doesn't have to be the manufacturer to make that
Right,
request.
right. I think you could.
No kidding.
You might have to submit some information from the manufacturer or CCOF, who already has some information in their files because it's listed in their materials lists. They might be able to look at it and say, "Oh yeah, that'd be fine."
Oh, so does that hold true for anything you're wondering if CCOF approves or Omri approves or not? Even if it's not on that list, say a totally different brand of pellets or whatever it is that's not listed on there, could I say, hey, can you guys check out Kirkland brand or whatever? Or would
You
they have
could.
to initially do it? Oh, okay, cool.
You could, and
Interesting.
you might have to produce the supporting documents yourself, find out who makes Kirkland brand wood pellets. Usually they're made to as high, if not a higher standard than the brand name of whoever makes them for them. So
Yeah.
that's generally the case. So yeah, but that would be a question for the certification specialist that's assigned to you when you're certified.
Okay. Gotcha. All right, cool. Thank you.
We're wrapping up. And we've got any other questions? This is your chance before we get into the harvest season. But I have another one of these in a couple weeks, but that's gonna be too late for probably anything up north. Definitely still time down in Vegas, I imagine. We don't have any other questions. Then I'm just gonna go ahead and say thank you, Rob, so much once again for sharing your wisdom with us. I really
Oh, you're
appreciate
welcome.
this. Is absolutely my favorite part of the week. Getting to hear how this all goes. I learned so much every one of them. So really, really appreciate that, and thank you for those of you who are tuned in to ask questions. I thought that was a really great discussion. So appreciate that all, and then we will see you all again in 2 weeks.
We'll see you then.
Take
All
care.
right, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Rob.
Take care.